Have you been diagnosed with a chronic illness and been left feeling dissatisfied or frustrated with the management options? Have you been told that you'll just have to live with it and it's now just part of your life, but you want to dive deeper and regain your quality of life? I'm joined by rapid transformation coach Alex Morris, who specializes in supporting those with living with chronic illnesses. Welcome to the Thriving Metabolism. I'm your host, Louise Digby, women's weight loss expert and founder of the Nourish Method to Lasting Fat Loss. Let's dive in. Okay, welcome back. I am here with the wonderful Alex Morris, and we are going to be talking about everything to do with chronic illness and endometriosis. And we'll be getting into talking about how we can stay motivated despite chronic illness and all that good stuff. So, welcome, Alex. I'm so pleased to have you here. Perhaps you could start things off by just telling us a little bit about you and what your backstory is, how you got into this world of nutrition.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a pleasure to be here, Louise. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be a guest on your podcast. You do amazing work. So, I'm Alex. I am the chronic illness coach. I started this business. It's a health and wellness business, specializing in those living with chronic illnesses. And it came from a really personal place. I was diagnosed with a chronic illness, endometriosis, when I was 18 years old, which is no age at all. I was still definitely, a teenager. I hadn't really got into my life when everything changed quite dramatically for me. So as a result of that, and after a few very different careers, so I haven't been in the health and wellness world forever. I did TV and a few corporate jobs, and that experience alongside living with a diagnosis and living with a condition kind of took me to a place where I was really inspired to try and make a difference and to really help and show those living with a chronic illness that it is possible to have the life you imagined, the career that you want, the dream kind of situation that you imagine for yourself. And I wanted to do what I could to help people like me kind of get to where they want to get to. I'm not an expert in one particular area, whether it's nutrition or genomics or anything like that. I have done a holistic approach to health, and I very much take a broader approach of mind and body, bringing that all together through integrative nutrition and a kind of a basis of functional medicine to look at the individual and see how we can help them and see how we can help them to thrive, really.
Amazing. Well, I know when it comes to endometriosis, there's so much conflicting information out there. There's a lot of misinformation out there and a lot of mismanagement of it as well. So I'd really love to dig into that and kind of clear some of that misinformation for people. So I'd love to start with thinking about what some of the root causes of endometriosis are, because I feel like this is something that it just doesn't really get discussed.
It's a great question. It's a question that actually even the experts and Endometriosis UK, the charity, are still doing a huge amount of research into. I have never heard of one absolute 100% root cause. It is still a mystery in lots of ways, which is a shame for people living with the illness as well as going through a diagnosis, because on average now, it actually was 7 years when I got diagnosed. The average amount of time it takes for diagnosis is now moved to 9 years
Wow.
in 2024, which is awful. So, 7 years was bad enough. Nine is just unthinkable, really. And there are some arguments to say that, like a lot of chronic illnesses, inflammation is at the root cause. So some practitioners can argue that chronic inflammation over a long period of time can then lead to some kind of very severe hormonal imbalance, which can then lead to endometriosis. That's one argument that I've heard. But again, it's not been categorically proven. There is the conversation about whether it can be categorized as an autoimmune disease. Again, that's a lot to do with chronic inflammation over a long period of time. But what actually happens inside is that the lining of the womb, the endometriotum, basically grows on places around the reproductive system, so the ovaries, fallopian tubes, the womb, where it shouldn't. So obviously it is the lining of the womb which builds up and then shed each month, but it can go in lots of other places, and it can actually go outside of your reproductive system. So it can go on your kidney and bowel and bladder. It can go all the way up, unfortunately, to your lungs and kind of your chest area. I think there was maybe one case that I heard of, potentially a different country, where it did actually go to someone's brain, which is very, very rare, and I haven't heard of it since. But unfortunately, yeah, it is possible for it to kind of travel all over your body. And to answer your question, so the root cause isn't 100% sure, but I think it's highly likely that hormonal imbalance has a huge part to play in this, as well as chronic inflammation.
Absolutely. Is there a genetic predisposition as well?
There's definitely research into it. I think again, there have been some arguments to say that there's some families where potentially if an auntie has had it, then maybe that niece is then gone down, or I haven't heard of categorically mum to daughter and down that way, but I think there
Mm,
could be definitely a genetic predisposition. And
mm,
again, that's research that's being done, but it isn't like a different condition where you can say, well, if mum has it, daughter absolutely will have. It
yeah.
may just be a factor.
So whenever I have women come to me who have endometriosis or having it managed, they're often very frustrated because, they might be told that their only options are to A, live with it, B, have surgery, or C, there may be certain medications like hormones that could be helpful. And it's usually not enough to really help vastly improve their quality of life, or sometimes these things don't really work. So what are your thoughts on that, and what are some other management methods?
I love that question because it highlights and it gives me an opportunity to talk about one of the things that is my biggest bugbear. So, something for me, both as a health coach and as someone that lives with endometriosis, the amount of stories that I hear, especially in the early days of diagnosis. So, we're talking probably maybe if you're going to your GP before you potentially get referred to a specialist clinic, because unfortunately, there aren't endo clinics in every hospital around the UK. They're actually quite few and far between. So I quite often hear of a stage in the diagnosis process where the contraceptive pill is really pushed to ladies that are suffering with endometriosis or other gynecological conditions. And that personally, I just think is one of the worst things you can give endo patients because we don't know exactly why it happens, but obviously there is some kind of vast hormonal extreme imbalance going on, and to give ladies with endometriosis the combined pill that has both estrogen and progesterone, that estrogen potentially, we don't know for sure, but potentially is just elevating that endo growth. So you are just, it's almost like putting gasoline on a fire. You are just spreading that further and further and making things much worse. So for me, the combined pill is a real bugbear. I am not a fan of when I hear on the Good Morning shows or whatever it is advertising that route down. I personally have tried the injection, which basically induces fake menopause. That is something that actually, at the time that I had it, did reduce quite a few symptoms. But for someone at 18 or 20 or 30, that is very, very young to be
Mm,
putting your body through fake menopause. And it has all sorts of side effects. I had to have HRT patches because of
mhm,
the risk of osteoporosis and all sorts. So again, it's not, there's a lot of cons. It may do something, but there's a lot of downsides.
mm,
And then like you said, you mentioned surgery. I've had quite a few surgeries myself. I actually would say that there is a place for surgery in endo management. I would hope that in the faraway future, maybe when I'm potentially kind of at the age of having grandkids, if I'm lucky enough, but probably at that stage, I would hope that they may well have figured out a way or a cure to manage this disease that isn't so invasive. But I think for where we are now, surgery does have a place. When they first started doing surgery, it was done with the laser. And actually, what we've discovered now is that endometriosis surgery with the laser can actually encourage that endometriosis to come back
mm,
twofold. And that actually hopefully is being phased out. I think unfortunately it may still be used on occasion. I have heard stories where ladies have had it and then wondered why it's come back so badly. So again, if you are talking to your surgeon, ask how that surgery is done. Laser is not something that you want to be going anywhere near. And then you've got excision surgery, which is kind of, it's like a knife and you actually cut out almost the pieces of the endo or burn it off to get rid of it.
mm,
So I think surgery does have a place, but it is very invasive. And we don't want to be putting young women under general anesthetic for long hours and going in and actually cutting things away. So I think that medication and surgery, yeah, they have their place, but I think the holistic realm needs to be looked at in a great more detail. There is a strong argument to say, like I said before, that chronic inflammation has a huge part to play here. So I think the reduction of inflammation in our lifestyles and our nutrition, in our environment, our toxins is really important. And that can really help to alleviate symptoms day to day. That is an area that I think is really missing in the Western medicine field.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think it's well, I was gonna say shocking, but it's not shocking because you just hear this stuff all the time. But I was gonna say it's just shocking that people are still having to go to the doctors, having done so much research beforehand to make sure that they're getting the right course of treatment for themselves, having to make sure that the doctor's not recommending the laser for the surgery, that they're not being put on the pill for this. And yeah, it's just, as I say, it's shocking, but at the same time, it's not shocking because we see this in so many different areas. It's just frustrating. So we really do have to be our own advocate and make sure that we're looking at the options that the doctor's giving us and researching them, and trying to decide what's best for us rather than just putting that in the hands of someone else.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. It's important to acknowledge and to be an advocate for yourself and for the wider issue of women's health in medicine and in the NHS, because it is not acceptable and it needs to be a hell of a lot better than it is at the moment. But balance that with putting yourself first, like you say. And if you need to do that research, if you need to go in prepared with notes and anything that makes you feel more confident, then also it's important to do that, because we need to work towards a better future, but we also need to prioritize our own health in the moment.
Just jumping back to what we were talking about before, why is endometriosis so difficult to diagnose? Why does it take so long?
Quite a few different reasons. One of the reasons is that there are such a vast amount of symptoms that you can get. There are symptoms I would say probably are more common and more popular, and in a lot of patients will crop up time and time again. But there are other symptoms that may develop first that aren't seen as typical or textbook, that are easily missed. So we hear a lot about painful periods. And when we say painful periods, hopefully a in quote normal healthy period, you may have some small cramping, but it is minor and it is on the low end of the side. The cramping that we're talking about means that ladies are unable to move, are unable to work, will stop eating, sometimes will actually be sick if the pain is so extreme, can
Mm,
pass out. So it's a level of pain that is really extreme, and it's actively interrupting your day and actively interrupting your routine. Heavy bleeding. One that people get very awkward about, but it's so important to talk about, is painful sex. So
mm,
actually, there's a lot. I think sex education needs massively reforming, but a lot of young women that I've spoken to, if they are more petite and smaller, they actually don't have the awareness that if they've actually got like a low level of pain during intercourse, they think that maybe is just normal or just acceptable. And it's really important to know that it should not be painful whatsoever. So that can be a big sign.
mm.
Really severe bloating, chronic fatigue. Again, chronic fatigue, it goes across so many different conditions that can be really tricky to figure out. And then it goes all the way to other things that are a little bit more uncommon. So it can be really extreme leg pain. It's almost like bolts of lightning going down your legs. Your joints can be very, very painful. You can also have, you could actually have endometriosis growing, let's say in the reproductive area, so in your womb, but you could actually have pain all the way up to your chest or in your shoulder or in your arms. So again, that's very difficult to connect those dots. If the pain
Mm.
is in one place, but the actual problem is somewhere else, it's very tricky to almost get back to that root cause.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's a very confusing picture of symptoms, and kind of untangling all of that is what takes the time.
Yeah, definitely. And I have sympathy for both sides. I can really sympathize with the fantastic GPs, because there are so many of them out there that
Mm.
really want to help and discover what's going on and are happy to go down that diagnosis route. I have a huge amount of sympathy, because it is a pick and mix of symptoms, and it can be very difficult to narrow that down with the resources and the time pressures that they're under. But of course, from experiencing it myself as well, I also have a huge amount of sympathy for any woman that is going through that diagnosis process, because 9 years is far too long to be in extreme pain. And it's also the stress, it's the mental, emotional, physical stress that you are in
Mm.
until you get those answers and until you can get some treatment.
Yeah, absolutely. It must be an incredibly frustrating and stressful time to be waiting to find out what on earth's going on with you. So, are there any real big misconceptions when it comes to endometriosis that you would love to just debunk?
The great question. The first one, I've touched on it already a little bit, but it is the whole thing around periods. It is not just a bad period. I think if you go onto any social media now, and again, it's good because it is advocacy, but the amount of videos I see where people are talking about it's not just bad period pain or that kind of misconception, whether either gender, female or male, I think it happens on both sides. If you are someone that's maybe never had bad periods or severe hormone imbalances, of course, you can't imagine being in that kind of pain because unless you physically experience it, none of us can imagine anything unless it actually happens to us and we can empathize, but only to a certain point. And I think, obviously, young men, there needs to be more education for them. I think there are a lot of young men. I have a partner,
Mm,
he's absolutely fantastic. He's had to have, bless him, a hell of an education about women's health when we're together and with my condition. So I think young men need more help to understand that as well. And it needs to come from both sides. So period pain's a massive one. There is a misconception on both sides, interestingly, about pregnancy. So for some people, they hear endometriosis and they automatically assume you cannot get pregnant, and that is just a dead end.
mm,
And then on the other side, there is a misconception sometimes that endometriosis actually can have an effect. So some people think, oh, it won't have anything to do with pregnancy, but it can do. It's not an absolute like sold deal, but it can. So there's the pregnancy thing. And I think it's important to say about that because it's quite a emotive and maybe triggering point for a
mm,
lot of people is that none of us know until we try. So
mm,
regardless of whether you have endometriosis or not, we don't know until we're kind of it's right for us and we give that a go.
mm,
It is not almost like a death sentence that if you have endo, you won't be able to have children. It's absolutely not the case. There are plenty of ways that you can, natural or otherwise, and there are plenty of things that you can do to help yourself get in a really good position for that. And actually, those principles and those health principles, and I'm sure you talk about this a lot with your clients as well, they apply to everyone, not just someone with endometriosis.
mm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The stuff that we talk about on this podcast all the time is all stuff that is going to help with managing endometriosis and taking a more holistic approach. And yeah, it's really, really uplifting, I think, to hear that, this isn't something that is necessarily going to absolutely interfere with you having children and your fertility. Like you say, there's lots of different options, and particularly as time goes on, there's more and more that can be done. So whether it's endometriosis or whether it's a chronic condition generally, how does someone stay positive and motivated to kind of continue working towards health goals, whatever those health goals might be, whether it's weight loss or whether it's fertility or whatever? How does someone stay motivated when you can kind of go through this pattern of getting a little bit better, then maybe having a bit of a relapse, then, kind of going backwards and forwards quite a lot?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really important that we ask that question because we talk so much about the negatives and
Mm,
validating that and the emotions, which is very important. But it's so important that you make space for what you just asked about the positive side of it. So I think the first thing to start with is to understand that you and your condition are two separate entities. I went through a big journey on this when I got diagnosed. It's very easy to have the label of whatever condition it is, endometriosis or otherwise, to almost have that almost like stick on and completely cover your own identity as a person. So
mm,
if you can work to really acknowledge that you as a person, your beliefs, your dreams, your values, your quirks, your personality traits, your qualities, they are all there. They haven't changed. They are still there in full. You now almost have a companion. It's almost now like you've got an extra kind of little person, whether it's an angel on your shoulder or a bag, or you just got something extra that you're now carrying with you. You
mm,
haven't transformed and lost that all. It's just an addition. So that's the first thing. And I think if you can separate the condition from yourself as in terms of your identity, you can then allow yourself to practice a huge amount of self-care. And I think self-care, people hear the word and they kind of go like, oh yeah, okay, if I had the time, or, on TikTok, self-care can look like putting a full face of makeup on or doing something very glamorous.
Mm,
And if people want to do that, that's absolutely fine. But when I talk about self-care, I'm really talking about like the fundamental basics that aren't trending or fashionable. We're talking about how we talk to ourselves. So our inner dialogue, are we being nice to ourselves, or are we being really cruel to ourselves?
mm,
We're talking about that work-life balance. I I have a huge amount of respect for anyone that works incredibly hard and can move 1,000 miles an hour and is incredibly productive. That's a great skill to have. But the bottom line is that our body and Mother Nature will always take over. So if we go too far, if we burn out, Mother Nature will almost come and give us a kick up the arse and say, right, come on, we've taken this too far now, and our body will then have to reset itself.
mm,
So that work-life balance is another form of self-care. Mindfulness, self-awareness, really getting to know you as a person. I talk a lot with my clients about gut instinct. Gut instinct is so important. And I think that comes from being able to take ourselves off autopilot, where we just kind of like walk through life and we're distracted by everything that's going on around us, and we really slow down and come back to a point where we're present, and we really connect that mind and body together,
mm,
and we really start to listen, because our body is sending us hundreds of signals every single day, and we are so busy and distracted, we're always kind of ignoring them. So it's about coming back and really listening to these signals and really kind of getting into your own body and almost like grounding feeling to understand it. So I
mm,
think those kind of things for self-care, the different identity is a really good basis for starting positivity. Because I think if you have a very solid foundation of everything that you need to put yourself first and to be kind to yourself, you can then build the hopes, the dreams, the career, maybe the family, the lifestyle, whatever it is that keeps you motivated and keeps you moving forward.
mm,
If you have that sturdy foundation, even when you go through lapses of more pain, less pain, surgery, recovery, whatever it is, you'll always come back to a really sturdy foundation, and that will always be there for you. And you can kind of oscillate between whatever it is that's going on for you.
mm. Yeah, so interesting because it's a similar conversation that I have with my clients when we're talking about weight loss and about having that solid foundation in place of looking after your self-worth and doing the self-care so that we are nice to ourselves and we love ourselves no matter what happens, so that we can be truly happy in ourselves. And also celebrating what your body can do, because often we can get so fixated on what isn't going well in our bodies or what our bodies can't do. But actually, just the simple practice of celebrating what we can do, what our bodies are capable of, can be really uplifting and empowering, and it can just help to shift you away from that quite draining headspace of thinking about your limitations.
Yeah, absolutely. And that celebrating of what you can do is so powerful. Like you say, it's potential to change your mindset, your experience, your lifestyle is just absolutely huge. And something that I am really passionate about, and it is quite different. It is out there. Not everyone will agree with it, and that's absolutely fine. But I do absolutely fundamentally believe that it is possible to put chronic illnesses into remission.
Mm,
I recently spoke with someone called Dr. Tom O'Brien, and he is on an absolute mission to do this, and he is a trailblazer in his work. And I think that we need to try, if we can, and move the conversation away from you've been dealt these cards, that's what life's given you, that's it, won't get any better, just going to have to kind of suck it up and deal with it. We need to move away from that if we can. And that is a message coming from practitioners to patients and in other areas. We need to move away from that, and we need to move to, like you say, a place of hope, and actually that reassurance that our body is absolutely incredible. What our body is capable of doing in terms of the healing mechanism that it has are just phenomenal. And
mm,
if we can change our lives and our approach and our lifestyle to a way where we enable our body to do what it's built to do and to unlock all of those incredible abilities, we can potentially move ourselves to a place that we hadn't before thought was possible.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I totally believe that you can put chronic conditions into remission. I've seen it happen many, many times. And as time goes on, there is a little bit more research that helps to support that theory as well. And yeah, Dr. Tom O'Brien is such a famous inspiration in the world of nutrition. Every nutritionist knows who he is. And it's because he's doing such amazing work to put chronic conditions into remission, stuff that we've been told that is just, stuff that you have to live with. It is how it is. And yeah, I think that people do really get stuck on that identity of their condition. They are someone who has chronic fatigue syndrome, someone who has endometriosis, IBS, whatever it might be. And I think separating yourself from that is so important so that you can move forwards and become someone who doesn't have that chronic condition. So, yeah, I think this is such an important conversation that we're having. Now, on the same sort of theme, how does someone start setting themselves realistic goals when they are, again, experiencing kind of relapses and things going backwards and forwards? How can they start to set goals so that they have something to focus on?
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Hmm.
It's very tempting, especially if you're someone that is driven, ambitious, hardworking, has those wonderful qualities. It's very tempting to think, wow, I want to get to the top of the mountain, so I'll just run and I'll just see how far I can get. And then you might get stuck or fall down, or actually you get a little bit way up and then think, wow, I'm absolutely shattered. I now need to go back to the start and start again.
Mm,
So it's about taking that mountain in really small bite-sized pieces, because actually progress, lots of people have probably seen the chart where progress isn't almost like a straight upward line. It's up and down and up and down. It looks like a staircase
mm,
almost.
mhm,
And so I think when you know, firstly, identifying the goals. So I think that identifying them is really important in terms of, don't make yourself a goal that's because someone else is doing it. Don't do it because someone else has told you to do it, or that's the trend, or that's what people are doing, or someone has said actually there's only right or wrong and there's no gray area. It needs to come from you. It needs to come from a place of passion. It needs to come from the heart. And it needs to really mean something to you, because then it becomes a non-negotiable and
mm.
you will put your heart and soul into achieving it. So the goal needs to be right for you, firstly. And then in terms of actually getting there, I think the best advice I can say is give yourself grace, that actually any movement in the right direction is worth doing. So let's say that you want to run 5K and you've maybe had your first week of 3 days of training and you've done really well, you've reached your goal and you've got there. The next week you have a huge flare up and you're at the point where it's painful to move. You have absolutely no interest in going running whatsoever. And maybe you've even indulged a little bit if there are some comforts that you have when you're in pain. Totally normal, totally human. Everyone does it. You are not alone in that, is the first thing to say. But during that time, if you can even just do 1% of what you hope to do, that still moves you in the right direction. So in this scenario, if you're even able to go for a 10, 15-minute walk or just walk to the top of your road and back, that is still something that is getting you closer to that goal, even in a time where you're really struggling because you're in pain or you're having symptoms or whatever it is.
Mm.
So it's about appreciating for yourself the tiny, tiny milestones as well as the big ones, because it's all moving you in the right direction. And actually, some progress, even the smallest 1%, is better than nothing.
Yeah, I love that because it's just so important to celebrate the little wins as well as the big wins. And I think particularly when you have a chronic condition, the bigger wins might take a little bit longer to get to. So it's even more important to celebrate the small steps that you take. And like you say, just doing one thing, it doesn't have to be a big thing, is enough to move you in the right direction. So yeah, absolutely love that message. So how can people find out more about what you do? How can people connect with you online?
Yes, so my website is www.chronicillnesscoach.co.uk. I work with people and individuals one-to-one. So people living with chronic illnesses that we've spoken about, I do one-to-one coaching with them, but I also do a huge amount of work with businesses and organizations. So there are a huge amount of employers, understandably, that may well be faced with employees that either are diagnosed with chronic illness or go through a diagnosis process whilst they're working there. And it can be very intimidating and quite overwhelming to have those individuals working there and to be thinking, well, what do I need to do as an employer? I'm worried about this. Is this going to affect my group or my workspace or my kind of community? Am I doing enough? Am I doing the wrong thing? So that is a really kind of passion project for me as well, to work with not only the individuals suffering, but also the communities that will involve people living with a chronic illness. So that's also on my website. And then I am all over social media, as everyone is, and that is Chronic Illness Coach as well. And you can find me on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok.
Amazing. I love that you work with companies. I think that that must be so rewarding, because what you're doing is having such a knock-on effect on so many people, immediately there, but also probably for years to come as well. So that's such great work that you're doing. Thank you so much for joining me today. And all of your links and stuff I'll pop in the show notes so that people can connect with you. But yeah, thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I really hope you enjoyed that as much as I did, and that you're left feeling empowered and knowing how to move forwards with your chronic condition. Now, if you have a question that you would like me to answer on the podcast, then did you know you can leave me a little voice note by going to speakpipe.com/Louise Digby. And you never know, I might create an entire podcast episode to answer your question. If you're enjoying this podcast, then please make sure you hit follow, subscribe on YouTube or Spotify or iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts, and make sure that you leave me a little review. It really does mean so much to hear how you're enjoying the podcast and how it's impacted your life. Thanks again. I'll look forward to seeing you in the next one.